So shopping centers, hotels, office buildings, and so on, or apartment houses are proprietary communities. The other kind is democratically run by the people who own properties in it, like a condominium, a residential association, or a cooperative. And so when entrepreneurs create a private community, they want to maximize profits just like other entrepreneurs, but a large part of their gain is the land value or land rent. So they seek to maximize the land rent, and that optimizes the land use. So the general principles for maximizing the efficiency and profit from land use, a common economic principle is that the optimal price of any good is equal to its marginal cost. The marginal cost is what it costs to produce that next unit. And so when people pay that price, then it's efficient pricing, whenever it's feasible. Now, this hotel practices that, for example, in the elevators. What's the extra cost of one more person on the elevator? Right? It's nothing, practically nothing, and so they don't charge anything. Right? So where do they get their financing? Well, a hotel without elevators would be able to charge a lot lower prices. People wouldn't want to live or go to a hotel that doesn't have elevators. So the elevator makes the room charge higher, and so Civic Works generate site rentals. And that goes for any kind of proprietary community, any kind of real estate community, if the services of the community enable the rental to be higher. Now, the marginal benefits decline. If the hotel had too many elevators, an extra elevator would not provide as much benefit. So with declining marginal benefits, the optimal quantity of a collective good is where the marginal cost equals the marginal benefit. The cost of providing a little more is equal to the benefit from that. Now, one of the authors of, one of the pioneers of proprietary communities was Spencer Heath, and his main book was written in 1957 called Citadel, Market, and Altar. And he developed the concept of the hotel as a community very much like a city. It's got parks, and the hotel lobby is like a park. The hotel corridors are like streets. The elevators and escalators are its public transit. And it's got administration, it's got fire protection, it's got security. The services that we typically think of from government are provided by proprietary communities like a hotel. But hotels compete in the market. The provision is voluntary. The people who stay there pay a charge voluntarily, unlike taxation. And the services largely come from the room rentals, plus a few other minor charges. His grandson was Spencer Heath McCallum, and his main book was Art of Community, published in 1970. And McCallum continued on that proprietary community theme. He's still writing about it. He says society suffers from schizophrenia because the same agency, government, that performs public services, which we want, also performs the disservice of cannibalizing society with taxation. We look at government to protect our property rights, but how does it get the financing? It takes away our property. William Vickery was another economist. He was very well known. He won a Nobel Prize. So he's known for marginal cost pricing. So what he said is we should price services such as transit at marginal cost. The user pays just the cost of his own use. And that would include congestion costs, because an extra person on a crowded train makes it more crowded for everybody else, or a crowded road makes it more crowded for everybody else. If a road or transit is crowded, you are imposing a cost on everybody else if you add to it. And he says, how can we know whether some community service is worthwhile? He says, build it if the rent generated by that service or public good is greater than the cost. And when the users pay the marginal cost, the user charge is often free, just like the hotel elevator, right? But then the rent will be sufficient to pay for the cost. If not, don't build it. I have followed the footsteps of Spencer McCallum and Spencer Heath in my own work. I've written a book called Public Goods and Private Communities. in which I refuted the concept of market failure for public goods. In fact, if you look at economic textbooks today, there's always a chapter on public goods, which means collective goods, and they'll always say the market fails to provide public goods. It succeeds in individually used goods, but when it's collective, there can be free riders and the market fails. And I've refuted that. I said it's not true in practice, and it's not true in theory even. Yet the books continue to say that, so they don't pay attention to me. But what I argue there is that there is market success, not failure, in providing public goods, both in theory and practice. So I have case studies of condominiums, residential associations, Walt Disney World, and other private communities actually providing collective goods in the market. And the problem that textbook writers say is, how do you know how much people want of a collective good? We know if you want a banana, how many people buys bananas. But, for example, in a transit system, there's one transit system in an area, so how can you know the demand? Well, what I say is the demand is revealed by the rent. It's what Vickery said also. If there's greater demand for something that benefits the territory, the rent will be that much higher. So we can measure how much the rent is. And the fact that the location has a rent implies there's no free riders. Because to use that, let's say to use a neighborhood park, most of the people live nearby, and you will pay extra rent in order to be located there to use that park. So there really aren't free riders. That whole argument of free riders falls apart because most economists think public goods are provided in ether instead of in actual space. And if you look at condominiums, residential associations, and so on, they are financed by assessments which economically are a rental paid by the members in order to get those services. Besides the financing, governments, of course, have zoning and regulations, and that's part of smart growth. So to recover from smart growth, private communities can play a large part. If we shift over from government communities to private communities, you can replace zoning and regulations, such as building codes, with covenants and easements. So a covenant is like a contract. A residential association may have covenants as part of its bylaws, and they're more flexible to change. The board of directors can change them. Zoning can be politically difficult to change, or they can use them for political advantage to grant variances and favors for individuals who escape those zonings. Easement is basically a contract to use somebody else's property for a specific use, such as to travel through somebody else's property. So Houston, for example, has no zoning, and it functions fine with covenants and easements. Homeowner associations would have deeds and bylaws that would be its own private rules. And then proprietary governance, when a corporation owns a shopping center, a real estate complex, it would then have administration and rules. Now, we can move towards private communities if we allow secession and tax substitution. People can secede from the government jurisdiction, not necessarily entirely, but for a particular service, such as if you don't like the garbage service of a city, you could create your own community garbage service privately and then not pay that fee to the city. So that would be tax substitution, is doing the same thing privately as a government does and then substituting the tax payments with these private payments. School is a good example. If you send a child to a private school, today you still have to pay the same tax as if you sent the child to a government school. Right? I refuse to call them public schools. But with tax substitution, you would be able to deduct that tuition from your tax liability. All right, so how would the financing of private streets and private transit work? Cars would pay, well, an entrepreneur would charge congestion and pollution charges for one thing. The congestion charge would be how much? Just high enough to eliminate the congestion. And you could do this by trial and error. If the road is still congested, then raise the cost. And as the previous speaker said, you would gradually increase the charge up to the peak use and then gradually reduce it. And when the street or highway is not congested, the charge should be zero because there's no marginal cost. You're not imposing a cost on anybody if it's zero. And pollution charges, then people should be responsible for the damage they cause to others. economists call that an externality. And we now have the technology to have pollution charges on cars. There are infrared devices that you can put at various intersections, and they would actually send beams out to actually measure the different kinds of pollution. And if you exceed a certain threshold, you'd be sent a bill. Now, private transit would have many different forms, jitneys or vans, which are outlawed in many places except unless they go to the airport. And they had curb rights. Dan Klein wrote about this, an economist, that these vans would be able to stop at various places different from the buses. They would have a right to stop and collect passengers at those areas. The streets could be owned by civic associations. There's a community called Rossmore near Walnut Creek. It's a retirement community. It owns its streets and maintains its streets, and it has its own public transit at no charge to the user. It's all paid for by the assessments of the homeowners. And with a private transit system and private roads, there would be no proxy taxes like a gasoline tax. There was Groucho Marx made a movie in which one of his songs was "I'm against it," right? So gasoline tax, I'm against it. It's for various reasons. Sometimes people call a gasoline tax a user charge, or it's for the use of the road. But it's a bad proxy. Simply buying a gallon of gasoline, right, does not imply a use of any street. All I did was bought gasoline. I could be going on a city street, a freeway, a private road. So it's a bad relationship, and it opposes a high gasoline tax, imposes a deadweight loss or excess burden on people who really are just driving and not really causing a problem. It replaces better alternatives. And as long as I'm saying what I'm against, I'm against speed limits, and I'm against photo-based traffic citations. Instead of speed limits, you should have a prima facie law where below the speed, you're presumed to be driving safely. Above it, you may drive, but you have a less presumption of safety. That's what they do in California with speeds below 65 miles an hour. All right, so how do we replace taxes? You can have voluntary user fees with electronic tolls and meters, community assessments like in residential associations, or the rentals paid by people and homeowners in hotels, shopping centers, congestion and pollution charges, and private and voluntary services. Voluntary services would supplement those that people pay for. We've all talked about how bad government is and how bad the bureaucracy is, but you have to analyze why does this happen? Because it's very well to propose better and more efficient systems, but any system that we have is going to be in there by the political process. So we have to understand why we have smart growth and other bad policies. And that is because our system is mass democracy, and mass democracy inherently fails. The structure of mass democracy, right, creates these problems. There's rent-seeking by special interest. That's a kind of a funny word, rent-seeking. It's really the seeking of transfers of privileges and subsidies from government, rent being a general term for income that you really didn't work for. There's the tyranny of the median voter. The average voter is catered to, and people at the fringes who actually might have better ideas are ignored. There's no such thing as the general will of the public. Economists and political scientists now know this. It's actually been known for several hundred years. But any system of voting is not going to achieve consistent outputs. There is no general will. And the typical voter is ignorant because he's one of thousands of people voting for a candidate or issue. So it's not worth knowing better about a candidate or issue. And candidates must have the money. So this inherent demand for money is going to be supplied by the special interests. Well, what's the remedy? The opposite of mass democracy is small group voting, where people only vote in tiny groups. For example, your local neighborhood council. And in that case, there's very little need for campaign money. You can have public meetings. You can distribute literature cheaply. You can personally meet and know the candidates. And the power would flow from the bottom to the top if you had small group voting. But you would only vote for your local neighborhood council. And then a bunch of 20 or 30 councils would then elect the next higher level of government from those council members. And that second level council or board of directors, whatever, would then elect the next higher level. And ultimately, the state legislature would then elect the Congress. And the Congress would then elect the president. So each stage elects the next higher stage. And now you might think, well, that's bad because I don't get to vote for president. Well, your single vote for president doesn't determine who the president is, and your influence is zero anyway. This at least would leverage your power because you could push the next level, and that level could push the next level, so you would have leverage. It's known in physics that you can lift a great weight if you have a long enough lever. So bottom-up power and money, and all of this complements private communities because they could be that bottom structure where they already have governance. So in conclusion, we want to recover from smart growth, replace dysfunctional mass democracy with bottom-up small group voting. I know it's not going to happen tomorrow, but you should at least be aware of the problem because that's the first step in reform is to be aware of why we have a problem. Replace zoning with covenants, replace taxes with fees and assessments, and privatize the streets, transit, and roads. And if we don't privatize it, then government should copy as closely as possible what private communities do because they do it more efficiently. Thank you.
You might remain down here.
Oh, yeah, questions.
Go ahead. We'll take questions now for this first speech.
Over there.
Fred, you're probably aware of the debate between, I guess, Bill Michelle and Bob Nelson on it. Bill Michelle likes to write about Huntsville City.
Yeah.
And in the debate, well, first of all, there's a lot of talk about Huntsville City, somewhere community. But in the debate, I think Michelle is arguing their complement, and Nelson is arguing the substitute.
Yeah.
And I would say you're supposed to be substitute side.
That's correct.
Okay. Do you have anything to say on that debate?
Well, they're substitutes because, as I said, you can provide a service privately or through the government. I know there's public-private partnerships, so they can be complementary. But for the most part, you know, either the private associations are going to maintain the street or the government. There can be partnerships where some members of a community belong to an association, others don't, and they have a common street, and therefore they could both maintain it. But by and large, I would say I agree that they're complements, and the secession and tax substitution would imply that they're substitutes, rather. Now, I have a little disagreement with Nelson. Nelson says you can privatize a neighborhood of, say, if, say, 80% of the homeowners want to, but the trouble I have with that is you're then forcing the other 20% to be in an association that they don't want to be in. So, and it also destroys the voluntary and market nature of a community association. So I would say that the community association should be allowed to be created and secede unanimously. Those who don't want to be in there should not be forced to be in there. Now, in St. Louis, there's one of my case studies in my book is the city of St. Louis. St. Louis has private neighborhoods within the city. And so the neighborhoods can form an association and secede the street from the city, and they would then maintain the streets. And as a private street, they can close one end off, and they actually have better security and higher property values in those private places. And you would have a lot more of them if they could deduct what they pay for those streets from their tax liabilities. They can't right now. Yeah.
We have some proposals here in San Jose to buy zoning. I'm sure you're aware of it, but I don't think the audience is. We have a proposal from a fellow who will spend $80 million building a soccer stadium if you will zone his industrial property for apartments.
Yeah.
That's an option.
Yeah.
So in effect, he's buying zoning. It looks like the city's going to go for it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the zoning shouldn't be there in the first place, so he's basically paying the city to avoid a restriction that shouldn't be there in the first place. Yeah. Yes.
Yes, in your building block form of government here, from the local on up to the president,
Yeah.
where do you place safety, like fire and police?
Oh, okay. That principle is called subsidiarity, where you put a service at the lowest possible level of government for which it's efficient. And economies of scale, that is how the average cost changes when you have bigger and smaller operations. Many government services have very small economies of scale. For example, a police department in a city of 50,000 or 100,000 is no less effective, or probably more effective, than a police department for a city of millions of people. So yeah, you would place the service at the lowest possible level. And with the money flowing up instead of top down, the political pressure would be to decentralize services. Yes.
Recently in Honolulu, the mayor gave the 38 local report the power or the money committed an annual amount of about $1.5 million annually to each 38 board. Then what happened was that the people who had their visions already pre-planned took over the system, and we ended up with $500,000 enabler funds just to market enablement. And it created a lot of havoc because each individual in each neighborhood wanted to have their own vision in policy. And what it did was it wasted millions and millions of dollars because there's no big picture. And what this did was it supplanted the city council and the mayor because they have their own custom opinion. But I'm not sure that that kind of small county or neighborhood thing works, you know. You can have these legislators take over the system. You can't still, each neighborhood is working in a vacuum. They don't know what the big picture is. That loses continuity.
Yeah. Well, who paid for the parks and the streets and security?
Oh, the county has to do it. I mean, this is just like free.
Okay, yeah, so that's the problem. You have free money coming down. If they raise their own money locally and the money flows up instead of down, then the incentives would be different because it's their money coming from their own members in the first place. So yeah, under this multi-level system, both the power and the money should flow from the bottom to the top. Each lower agency sends money to the next higher agency. In that case, their incentive is to avoid wasting.
But the same thing is happening with our MPO. This MPO is just like an invisible power because they have so much power over the legislators and the rest of the elected officials. I'm just saying that there's too much of invisible government.
Well, I'll talk to you later about how it works. Yes.
Yes, the question I would have, why is it we so easily calm into thinking that there are no examples of what we're talking about? So, for example, when people say to me, oh, transit has to be Republican funded, I say, well, taxis and aircraft aren't.
Yeah, right.
So taxis are never included in the transit.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's an area for every 300 people bottom up.
Yeah.
5 companies run all the water and food.
Yeah. Yeah, that's,
Go on, and
yeah.
there are these kind of factors.
Right.
And people say, oh, you don't have building permits. I say, well, what about all the sleeping boats? And they say, what sleeping boats? And I say, precisely.
Yeah, that's right. The question is, can a private road make money? And my answer is, if it can't make money, it shouldn't be built. Right? And it can make money in several ways by charging user charges, congestion charges, and tolls. But secondly, a road will increase the land value of the surrounding area, and those communities served by the road can then contribute to the building of the road because their land values and rents have gone up. And if that road does not increase land value or rent, and the charges can't pay for the road either, then it shouldn't be built. Yeah. Yes. All right, thank you.
Brett, that was good, very good.